Pam Bondi had always projected the image of an unflinching land order figure, the kind of official who claimed to speak truth to power while staying firmly within the parameters of her chosen narrative. But underneath that polished image lay a tangled web of allegiances and quiet evasions that no one in the mainstream media seemed brave enough to touch until a clip, just 14 seconds long, played by none other than Denzel Washington during a heated interview, detonated the carefully curated facade she had spent years building. It wasn't just the timing of the clip that stunned viewers, it was the context. The implication, and most of all, the blunt refusal to allow a lie to go unchecked. The moment had all the hallmarks of a cultural reckoning, the type that ripples beyond the immediate blast zone. To understand how it happened, and why Denzel, a figure generally seen as respectful, deliberate, and rarely political, chose that precise moment to step into the fray, one had to unravel months, if not years, of subtext, quiet conspiracies, and truths hidden in plain sight. Pam Bondi had, during her tenure as Florida Attorney General, taken an interest, or rather, a disinterest in one of the most notorious cases of the 21st century, that of Jeffrey Epstein. While Bondi publicly stated she wanted justice for victims, internal documents, quietly shelved depositions, and unusually timed donations began to raise questions. These weren't accusations thrown by fringe conspiracy theorists, but rather murmurs that gained credibility every time someone in power abruptly changed the subject when Epstein's Florida operations were mentioned. But no one had the audacity, the platform, or the sheer presence to force the subject into the mainstream until Denzel, seated across from a panel of skeptical but visibly nervous talk show hosts, simply tapped a button on his phone and played the clip that he had been sitting on 4 weeks. The clip, taken from a closed-door state committee meeting and believed to have been buried, showed Bondi not only dismissing key testimony from a victim, but laughing about what she called another one of those massage girls who just wants to be famous. In 14 seconds, the tone, the body language, the callousness, it said everything. It wasn't just damaging, it was nuclear. The hosts tried to pivot, to deflect, to blur the moral lines, but Denzel leaned in, looked straight at the camera, and said, "This is why they want silence. This is why truth makes people uncomfortable." And with that, the ground began to shake, not just metaphorically, but politically, culturally, and institutionally. Social media erupted in a firestorm that not even Bondi's most loyal allies could contain. Trending within minutes under hashtags like #BondiExposed and #EpsteinCoverup, the clip began circulating faster than any coordinated PR response could neutralize. What made the moment uniquely powerful wasn't just the shocking content of the clip, it was who had shared it. Denzel Washington was not some firebrand activist or controversial celebrity chasing viral moments. He was one of America's most respected actors, known for his quiet integrity, spiritual depth, and deliberate avoidance of political controversy. The fact that he had broken that long-standing silence spoke volumes. Journalists scrambled to verify the authenticity of the clip, but within hours, experts confirmed the footage had not been altered. It was real. And the timestamp matched a meeting during Bondi's final year as AG, a session that had mysteriously never been recorded in the public minutes. Suddenly, every decision, every prosecutorial delay, every half-hearted public statement Bondi had ever made about Epstein was being reviewed under a microscope. Denzel wasn't finished either. Later in the segment, he laid out a timeline, naming names not in a conspiratorial tone but with methodical calm, citing court records, sealed depositions, and even calling out former state prosecutors who had resigned under suspicious circumstances. There was no shouting, no name-calling, just a relentless unfurling of a narrative that had, for years, been kept in the dark. The clip became more than just a viral sensation, became a catalyst. Within days, Florida's Office of the Inspector General announced a formal inquiry into how Bondi's office had handled the Epstein investigation. Several former staffers came forward, now emboldened, claiming they had been told to avoid pressing charges that could tie Epstein to powerful individuals with ties to Tallahassee. Those individuals, they implied, included donors, political figures, and at least one former governor. What started as a moment of clarity on national television had quickly escalated into a full-blown institutional crisis. Pam Bondi herself issued a written statement calling the clip misleading, out of context, and politically motivated, but the damage was done. America had seen the clip, and for many, including former victims who had long felt unheard, those 14 seconds validated years of pain, frustration, rage. The irony in all of this wasn't lost on those watching closely. Here was Denzel Washington, a man who rarely, if ever, used his fame for public call-outs, becoming the very voice that shattered the illusion of legal impartiality Bondi had long relied on. What made it especially poignant was the calm precision with which he handled it. No dramatics, no slogans, just the truth, delivered without apology. The entertainment press, unprepared for such a serious turn in the cultural narrative, scrambled to make sense of it. Some tried to paint Denzel's actions as part of a larger Hollywood crusade, lumping him in with more outspoken figures. Those who understood his history knew this was different. Denzel wasn't trying to go viral. He wasn't riding a wave, he was making one. His decision to break ranks with Hollywood silence, especially on a topic as radioactive as Epstein and the institutional figures who may have enabled him, was a calculated risk. But it paid off, not just in terms of public reaction, but in how it reignited journalistic interest in a case many assumed had been resolved with Epstein's mysterious jail cell death. In the days that followed, new reports surfaced. Investigative outlets published old memos from the AG's office suggesting deliberate slow-walking of evidence. Victims who had previously declined interviews now spoke openly, emboldened by what they called the Denzel effect, a wave of public validation that finally made them feel believed. One young woman, now in her 30s, told a reporter, "We screamed for help for years." One man hit play on his phone and everything changed. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi's media team went into overdrive, trying to discredit the clip and anyone associated with it. But every denial only brought more attention. The media's attempts to downplay the situation as a smear campaign backfired. Alternative platforms exploded with commentary. Influencers, YouTubers, podcasters, they all latched onto the clip, breaking it down frame by frame. The angle of Bondi's smirk, the muted laughter of those around her, the dismissive wave of her hand. Of it became fuel for a movement demanding accountability. What had once been whispers of doubt had become a roar. And through it all, Denzel Washington remained silent. After the initial interview, he declined follow-ups, offered no commentary, and posted nothing to social media. It was as if he had said everything he needed to say in those 14 seconds. That restraint only added to the moment's gravity. In a culture obsessed with constant commentary, Denzel's silence screamed, and it forced others to speak up in his place. Legal. Scholars dissected Bondi's history of selective prosecution. Former victims rallied for new hearings. Lawmakers faced pressure from constituents who were no longer satisfied with the old explanations. Even those who had once dismissed Epstein's victims as attention seekers began to reconsider. When people talked about the clip, they didn't just say that video, they called it the clip. It became a cultural artifact passed around like forbidden knowledge finally made public. That short burst of footage, less than a quarter of a minute, pierced through the noise, bypassed the usual partisan filters, and landed directly in the conscience of a country that had grown numb to outrage. It reminded people that justice wasn't just about courts and lawyers. It was about what we tolerate, what we ignore, and who we're willing to believe. And in the end, it wasn't a journalist, politician, or a prosecutor who forced America to look. It was an actor holding up a phone, pressing play, and trusting that the truth would do the rest. As the dust refused to settle, and the aftershocks from Denzel Washington's clip continued to pulse through the public consciousness, the second phase of reckoning began not with fire and fury, but with subpoenas and silence. Pam Bondi had vanished from the media circuit almost overnight. The once proud defender of conservative values who had been a frequent presence on cable news, radio shows, and think tank panels had suddenly gone dark. Her official statement, issued through a legal representative, called Denzel's actions reckless and irresponsible, claiming that the footage had been selectively edited and misinterpreted. But experts quickly refuted the claim. Audio engineers, video analysts, and legal observers came forward within hours of the statement, affirming that the clip had not been manipulated in any way. And more damning still, insiders began leaking additional footage from that same closed-door session. These unedited segments showed Bondi brushing off not one, not two, but several testimonies from survivors, often interrupting or redirecting the conversation to unrelated matters. What had once been dismissed as a 14-second smear became a 47-minute expose that made it impossible for anyone to argue the incident had been taken out of context. Denzel never said another word publicly, but he didn't have to. His silence became a lighthouse, guiding others toward the truth. It wasn't long before whistleblowers, some of them former investigators, clerks, even interns, began stepping into the light. One former assistant in the AG's office recounted how she was explicitly told to avoid filing certain warrants for political reasons. Another said he'd witnessed Bondi take a call during a meeting, after which she had suddenly decided to drop an entire line of inquiry regarding Epstein's Palm Beach properties. None of these revelations came as isolated shocks. They were pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that, once assembled, portrayed a legal office more interested in managing scandal than delivering justice. Bondi's defense crumbled further when financial records, long ignored, were re-examined under a different light. Donations from Epstein-linked organizations, CAC contributions from firms tied to known Epstein associates, and suspicious delays in litigation timelines all began to surface. Journalists, who had once treated the Epstein case as a closed chapter, reopened their investigations. The findings were more damning than anyone could have imagined. Pam Bondi, it turned out, received a 6-figure campaign donation from a real estate shell company that, according to multiple reports, had funneled money on behalf of a trust connected to Epstein's inner circle. The donation came mere weeks before her office announced it would not pursue additional charges against Epstein in the state of Florida. Coincidence? Unlikely. But in a world where timing is everything, this alignment of events ignited outrage among legal scholars, journalists, and victims' advocacy groups. Protests erupted outside Bondi's former office, and digital campaigns demanded a federal inquiry. Calls grew louder for the Department of Justice to intervene, especially as more former state prosecutors admitted that crucial witness testimonies had been archived without action. What made all of this unprecedented was the way it unfolded, not through some coordinated media blitz or political coup, but from the power of a single moment of truth captured and amplified at exactly the right time. The fact that it came from Denzel Washington, someone with no prior agenda in these legal affairs, made it all the more devastating. His credibility, his status as a moral compass in American culture, acted as a force multiplier. Viewers didn't just hear the clip, they felt it, believed it, and in many cases, recognized themselves in the betrayal it exposed. Suddenly, every single story of institutional neglect, of predator-friendly cover-ups, of powerful people evading justice, came rushing back into the public's mind. The Epstein case wasn't a closed book, it was an open wound. And Pam Bondi's name was now carved into it. But perhaps the most unexpected consequence of the clip's release was the split it created within the conservative establishment itself. Bondi had long been considered a golden child in Republican circles, a hardline attorney general, a reliable TV pundit, and a potential future Senate candidate. But with her credibility in freefall, fractures began to appear. Some GOP strategists tried to distance themselves, framing her as a state anomaly who had acted independently of broader party goals. Others doubled down, accusing Denzel Washington of being a puppet for Hollywood elites trying to rewrite history. But that line of attack failed spectacularly. Not only did it ignore Denzel's long-standing reluctance to participate in partisan narratives, but it also backfired by appearing dismissive of the very real trauma survivors had endured. Meanwhile, Democrats were cautious, not out of sympathy for Bondi, but out of fear that digging too deep into Epstein's legacy might implicate their own. After all, Epstein's reach had extended far beyond Palm Beach, touching names from both sides of the aisle. What emerged was not a bipartisan demand for justice, but a cautious, stuttering retreat from all involved. Only the public ordinary people online, survivors, independent journalists, continued pushing forward. As more footage leaked, as more whistleblowers emerged, the tide refused to turn. Bondi's attempts to relaunch her public image failed. Her scheduled appearance at a major conservative summit was canceled without explanation. A planned book tour was postponed indefinitely. Interviews she had previously agreed to were quietly dropped by networks afraid of touching a story that had gone from controversial to radioactive. Meanwhile, Denzel's 14-second clip continued to circulate. Students played it in college lectures. Activists used it as the centerpiece of reform campaigns. Legal watchdogs began citing it as the catalyst for renewed investigations into prosecutorial accountability. Through it all, the man who had first pressed play remained a ghost in the public eye, present in consequence, absent in presence. He had fired the shot. America was still watching where it landed. As the firestorm grew into something resembling a national inquiry, one undeniable truth cemented itself in the cultural consciousness. Bondi had not just failed in her duties, she had buried them. Her attempts to bury Epstein's connection to powerful Florida elites now read not as bureaucratic decisions, but deliberate obstructions. And the court of public opinion, always more ruthless than any jury, had rendered its verdict. Satirical shows, late-night hosts, and sketch comedy programs all pounced on the moment. Out. But behind the jokes was real anger. The Epstein case had long been a symbol of institutional Rothschild wealth. Power and connections could insulate even the most depraved criminals. Pam Bondi, in those 14 seconds of video, became the new face of that rot. She wasn't just the bystander who let it happen, she was the gatekeeper who kept the door closed. And Denzel Washington, by doing what prosecutors, politicians, and pundits had failed to do, had forced that door open. It was never really about him. It wasn't even about the clip, per se. It was about truth raw, uncomfortable, and undeniable finally reaching daylight. The tragedy, of course, was that it had taken this long, that survivors had waited this many years for a sliver of validation, that justice had been locked in a drawer, waiting for someone with nothing to gain and everything to risk to press a button and share it. But now it was out there. And once truth is loose in the world, no amount of denial, distraction, or deflection can put it back where it came from.